moving experience. Aux champions.
To the dedicated advocates from the Sickle Cell Disease Associations of Canada and Quebec, thank you for your tireless work, raising awareness and creating a national sickle cell registry in cooperation with the Ottawa Hospital. I encourage all my colleagues to learn more about this disease and support the efforts of groups working for better treatment options. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, as you file into the stream, I'd like to encourage you to give a like and subscribe if you haven't already. It will really help push the stream out.
Home to some of the most incredible people in Quebec, people who are deeply involved in their community. Among them are three exceptional people whose work I'd like to highlight today as they are about to retire. François Picard is taking his leave on June 30th after 41 years in Quebec's weekly newspaper industry. Sergeant Lionel Bourdon of the Longueuil Police Force, who retired a few days ago after 58 years of loyal service, if you can believe it, becoming the longest-serving police officer in Canada. And finally, Hélène Bordelot of the South Shore Homelessness Roundtable, who has worked with community organizations to strengthen the social safety net for nearly 40 years. I'd like to tell them today in front of all my colleagues here what inspiring people they are and how their work has made all the difference for the people of Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you.
The honourable member for Mississauga East Cooksville.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of Bolesław Julius Fuyarchuk, who passed away June 6th in his 99th year after a long, remarkable life. From proudly serving during the Second World War to earning notable commendations such as the Polonia Restituta Cross, British Defence Medal, and the British Service Medal, to becoming a successful businessman and prominent community leader, Bolesław lived an extraordinary life. Although involved in many Polish organizations in Canada, the most notable involvement he had was in founding the St. Maximilian Kolbe Church and the John Paul II Cultural Center in my riding of Mississauga East Cooksville. Our thoughts and deepest sympathies are with his loved ones and the entire family at this trying time, in particular his children Richard, Teresa, and Theodore. On behalf of the people of Canada, I thank Bolesław Julius Fuyarchuk for his services. May he rest in peace. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
The saying goes that you can't choose your family. The family that was chosen for me includes my granddad Francis and my late grandma Betty, who passed away 5 months ago. Married for more than 71 years, they dedicated themselves to community and family. Grandma was dedicated as a daily volunteer at Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Parish in Vanier, and Granddad was dedicated in his work with the RCMP and CSIS. An avid follower of politics and a proud conservative, my granddad is my #1 supporter and is counted among the family of members from all parties who are CPAC's most loyal viewers. Today, he might have a better view than watching on CPAC, and
He's going to watch Mistersunshinebaby.
Him and my dad Chris on Parliament Hill today.
Oh, he's there in person. Never mind.
His family: Betty, Greg, Chris, Ann, Audrey, Brian, Elizabeth, Matthew, Sue Lynn, Allison, Kyle, Jeffrey, Vanessa, Neil, Kim, Daniel, Alexandra, Daniel, Aubrey, Luke, Emma, Michaela, James, Nathan, Santiago, Beatrice, Jack, Maggie, Bentley, Paisley, and Keegan. We don't get to choose them, but I know he doesn't have to grin and bear it, because it's a blessing to be counted as a part of this family.
The honourable member for Newmarket, Aurora.
Yeah, screw CPAC.
Newmarket, Aurora.
We don't like CPAC.
Again, being provided with an uplifting musical experience courtesy of the Visual Performing Arts Newmarket. Celebrating their 25th anniversary, the Three for the Show concert series has hosted some of the most celebrated and gifted classic and jazz music talent on the scene today. The concert, and indeed the 25 years of musical performances, serves as a reminder of the essential cultural importance and the historical significance of music in building whole communities. My gratitude goes out to the gifted performers and to VPAN for providing a platform to the brightest, the most gifted in performance arts and industry today, and the most promising young musicians of tomorrow. Thank you, VPAN and the Three for the Show Committee, Erica Kerwin, Margaret Barkman, Judy Craig, Marcilla Sinclair for your beautiful concert series.
The honourable member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow is the first day of summer officially, and there's no better place to spend those long summer days than in Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing. From festivals to powwows and fairs, every corner of my riding has your summer fun covered.
We'll celebrate Uranium Days with special events and activities leading up to Canada Day. And Hearst continues to celebrate their centennial with tons of activities during Homecoming Week. You love powwows? There's one almost every weekend from Shagwinda First Nation to Mishapakaten First Nation. Love boating or camping? There's no shortage of lakes, including Lake Huron and Lake Superior. Winnie's Hometown Festival in White River is the perfect place to celebrate the world's most famous bear, and the Wickwimikung Annual Cultural Festival shouldn't be missed. You'll also find several agricultural fairs from Providence Bay to Bruce Mines. And for music lovers, get this, the Go North Festival, the Manitoulin Country Fest, and Rocking the Rock are a must. You can see AMK, you can see, Mr. Speaker, AMK is the place to be for fun in the sun. So come on over.
The honourable member for Essex.
Speaker, Canadians are struggling with the cost of food, gas, and housing expenses, but this Liberal government continues to tax Canadians not once, but twice with carbon tax. This Liberal government has racked up a record amount of national debt, doubling it in recent years. We all know about Carbon Tax 1, which puts 41 cents a litre on gas. It's evident Carbon Tax 1 will cost $1,500 after rebates per family. Now we have the sneaky Carbon Tax 2. The Liberals call it the fuel standard. Once again, Liberals leave families with nothing left in their pockets. Do the Liberals know how much this will cost Canadians? No, they don't.
Millions.
It's a clear choice for Canadians. Do they want a Liberal government who tax Canadians and put our nation into greater debt? Or do they want Conservatives who will balance the budget, reduce debt, and axe the tax?
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Scarborough North.
Monsieur le Président, as the school year concludes, to recognize the hard work and achievements of students in my riding of Scarborough North over the past year. Through the African Canadian Christian Network, Black youth on the Umoja robotics team are being celebrated off the heels of their stellar performance at provincials. At the Spelling Bee of Canada regional competition, school-aged children spelled their way to success, with first place winners moving on to the national championship. Then there are extraordinary young leaders like Anastasia Lina Hamichi, graduating from L'École Secondaire Etienne Brûlé with a 95% average. Defying societal expectations, she is a young woman entering first-year engineering on a full scholarship, having founded a technical team and supported other girls passionate about STEM. Congratulations to Anastasia Lina and the thousands of students in Scarborough North and across Canada who are graduating this month. Wishing them every success on their journey ahead. Merci.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, food bank usage in Canada has reached record highs. According to Second Harvest, a not-for-profit organization, food bank usage is expected to serve 60% more people per month this year in comparison to 2022. It's not only low-income people who are struggling. Many of those accessing the food banks are employed. Dalhousie University's food price report stated food inflation exceeded 10.3% in 2022. Unfortunately, we are halfway through 2023, and it does not look any better.
No.
These prices for fruits and vegetables are continuing to rise 7% with no end in sight. Consequently, it is harder for Canadians to meet their nutritional goals and properly nourish their families. Whether you're buying for your own table or donating to the food bank for the millions of Canadians.
Smash that like button, everybody. Let's try to get to 100 before QP starts.
Groceries. These Liberal policies have evidently made life harder for everyone.
Helps fight climate change.
Income. It is imperative that the government reverse the inflationary spending and give Canadian families a break.
Here, here. Great. The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, it's my favorite season of the year, rodeo season. Next week, I'm off to the greatest show on dirt, the Williams Lake Stampede. And after that, it's Billy Barker Days and the Quesnel Rodeo. There's only two things on everyone's mind back home, and that's the fast-paced, world-class rodeo action. Yeehaw! And what a disaster this Liberal government has been. The Liberals' carbon tax and massive deficit spending has the Caribou bucking like a bull rider on the Sunday finals. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, the cost of everything has doubled. Housing, doubled. Mortgages, doubled. Rent, doubled. Down payments, doubled. When mortgage renewals hit in 4 years, it'll be like we're riding bareback without rigging. After 8 years, it's time to cowboy up. Trash this Liberal government. Get Canada back on track. Your home, my home, our home. Let's make it home!
Sorry, I got excited.
Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, it's a privilege for a member of Parliament to introduce a private member's bill. Working with colleagues.
Drop some W's in the chat, everybody, for the Conservatives. They are hyped. This is going to be a wild episode. Drop some W's. Check to see if you're subscribed. Check to see if you've hit that like button.
Support of horses for slaughter. Other countries have.
Conservatives are fired up.
For Canada to do the same. I proudly stand in this chamber to announce that when the House resumes for the fall session, I'll introduce my private member's bill to ban the export of live horses for slaughter. This practice must stop. As a sitting member of the Agriculture Committee, I look forward to working with my fellow committee members, as well as members of Parliament on both sides of this House. I also look forward to hearing from Canadians, stakeholders and advocates to advance this important piece of legislation. I ask my colleagues and Canadians to join me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Under this Liberal government, the ultra-rich are getting richer and hardworking Canadians are falling further and further behind. The top CEOs are now making 243 times more than the average Canadian worker at their company. Loblaw CEO Galen Weston is paid $11.79 million a year in salary, which is 431 times more.
Jagme wants some of that.
Of an employee at that company. Les libéraux et les
Liberals and Conservatives have repeatedly voted against making CEOs and large corporations pay their fair share. Instead of sticking up...
Yeah, drop some L's in the chat for
Liberals and Conservatives.
South Sing. Some L's. Boo.
Scales in favor
Boo.
of Canadians.
Introduced a plan to fight corporate greed and end outrageous CEO pay. Do Democrats believe, we believe, that Ottawa should work for hardworking Canadians, not CEOs?
Here, here, here. L'honorable.
The honourable member for Abitibi, James Bay, Nunavik, AU. Mr. Speaker, the forest fire situation in Abitibi, James Bay, Nunavik, AU has improved some, but it's not over yet. The last evacuees are returning home, but it's too soon to claim victory, as they may have to evacuate again. I'd like to thank all the firefighters who've come from abroad. Excuse me, just a minute. Apparently, the interpretation isn't working. Can you hear it?
It's like Inception. The interpreter's interpreting, the interpretation doesn't work.
Interpretation working? Okay, I'll ask the honourable member to start over. The honourable member for Abitibi.
You can't make this up.
Nunavik, AU. Mr. Speaker, the forest fire situation in Abitibi, James Bay, Nunavik, AU has improved some, but it's not over yet. The last evacuees are returning home, but it's too soon to claim victory, as they may have to leave their homes again if the dry weather continues. I'd like to thank all the firefighters who've come from abroad or other provinces and the Army to help us fight these fires. I'd also like to thank all those who have participated in any way in the evacuation and return process. Many thanks to the mayors of the towns that took in evacuees: Chibougamau, La Sarre, Val-d'Or, Santerre, Quebec City, Roberval, and Chicoutimi. Special thanks to Chantier Chibougamau and Barrette-Chapet, who dug trenches to stop the fires. And finally, a special thank you to the mayors of the evacuated municipalities in my riding. You acted quickly and with remarkable professionalism to take control of this situation. The Bloc stands with you in these difficult times. Thank you.
The honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, you either gain control of your money or your money will control you. Thanks to the wasteful spending of this Prime Minister, Canadians' debt is controlling them with crippling interest rates high. It's a broken promise, empty promises that said that this government would balance the budget or have Canadians' backs. But since COVID-19, this Prime Minister has spent $205 billion on taxpayer dollars on debt outside of COVID-19 problems, like how he would spend the $27 million in bonuses to CMHC executives in the worst housing crisis in Canadians' history, or $8.6 million to renovate his taxpayer-funded cottage at Harrington Lake, or $210 million to the corrupt and communist Beijing-controlled Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Inflation makes Canadians' money worthless, it's theft, and it's a direct result of a reckless government who spent $100 billion before COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, a promise made is a debt unpaid, and empty promises by this government is leaving Canadians with empty wallets.
The honourable member for York Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, 5,100 Canadian women died from breast cancer. 12% of women in Canada will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime. They are our mothers, sisters, and daughters. They all are among us. Breast cancer screening is important for women of every age. Screening guidelines must be up to standard and based on science, because we know that early detection saves lives.
They love that science.
We announced $500,000 in funding for the Canadian Task Force on Preventative Health Care to expedite the update of the breast cancer screening guidelines. This could not have been done without the voices of doctors, patient advocates, and survivors like York Centre constituents Sheriff Barbara Nadina Eisenberg, broadcaster Kim MacDonald, and Ottawa advocate Julie Booker, amongst the many, many Canadian women from coast to coast. We will keep working together to empower women to protect their health and choose evidence-based preventative health tools for early detection. Together, we can and will continue to work towards a brighter, cancer-free future for all Canadian women.
Oral questions.
Question orale, Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Let's go, everybody.
Il nous faut rétablir la confiance.
We have to regain trust in our democracy after it has been shattered by Beijing's interference, and that is the reason for which I've already spoken to other opposition leaders and a government minister regarding a public inquiry. The Conservative Party is ready to share non-partisan names that would be acceptable for all members of Parliament. The second, the Prime Minister will announce a public inquiry. Will he do it right here and right now? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as we have said from the very beginning, foreign interference should not be a partisan affair, and that is why the Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs in the next few days will continue to consult experts, legal experts and opposition parties in order to define the next steps to follow and the person best placed to lead these operations. Until then, we'll continue our efforts to fight foreign interference in our democracy, as we have done since we arrived in power. We hope that opposition parties will deal with this as seriously as we do. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians are suffering because of his promises and because of his actions. Émilie Choquette wrote a letter to the Journal de Montréal saying that one family had to sell their home because they couldn't keep up with their mortgage payments.
Brutal.
Their payments had gone up from $2,300 to $3,700, so they will no doubt have to lose their house because of the inflationist policies of this government. Will the Prime Minister reverse on that decision? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we are the government that implemented tangible measures to help families like Emilie's family. It is the Conservative Party that systematically voted against help for dental care that will help young children and will help families, help for low-income renters, help for groceries. These are tangible investments that we're doing right now to help families weather the storm while we build a stronger and more resilient economy with good jobs in the years to come, whilst we're investing in housing.
The Prime Minister claimed that the government would take on debt so that Canadians wouldn't have to, forgetting, of course, that it's Canadians who pay all of that debt through their taxes. And
that didn't work out.
Because they have the biggest household debt of any country in the G7. In fact, family debt in Canada is bigger than our entire economy, prompting our banking regulator today to force banks to take on more of a rainy day fund to face down future defaults that they expect will rise as a result of growing interest rates. The Prime Minister's inflationary policies are driving up interest rates on Canadian mortgage holders. Will you balance the budget to bring down inflation and interest rates so Canadians can keep their homes?
Hear, hear.
I would love to keep my home.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are struggling, and that's why we continue to step up with investments to help them out with dental care, with support for low-income renters, investments in housing, investments in supporting families. So at the same time that the Conservative Party is proposing cuts and austerity, we're continuing to invest. But if the Leader of the Opposition really wants to come clean with Canadians, will he talk about whether he's going to cut childcare for families or dental care for children or better health care services? These are the things that he will be cutting, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister is, after 8 years, is imposing austerity on Canadians. I just told the story in French of a Quebec family who's seen their mortgage payments rise by 64%. She's making, the mother of that family is living austerity by having to cut back on her expenses and probably move into a tiny apartment as a result of his inflationary spending. Even his finance minister admits that deficits drive inflation, and inflation drives higher interest rates on families just like this one. Will he reverse his deficits, balance the budget to bring down inflation and interest rates so Canadians can keep their homes?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is proposing cuts in supports to Canadians at the same time as Canada actually has the lowest deficit in the G7, the best debt to GDP ratio.
AAA credit rating.
And we've preserved our AAA credit so that we can continue to be there to support Canadians with investments in them, in their families, in housing, in the kinds of support.
Sorry for screaming.
The Leader of the Opposition would cut. So he's just continuing his attacks to try and distract from the underwhelming election results he got last night.
I'm sorry for screaming. I've just seen the script, apparently.
Mr. Speaker, what is overwhelming is the debt that he has imposed on the backs of hardworking Canadians. Canadians who now face the loss of their homes as a result of his inflationary policies. After 8 years, the cost of rent has doubled. After 8 years, the cost of a mortgage payment has doubled. After 8 years, the needed down payment for the average house has doubled. And now, because of the massive mortgages that he told Canadians would be consequence-free, that they now hold and now pay higher interest rates on, many could lose their homes. Will he reverse these inflationary policies so that Canadians can keep their homes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
You see how quickly he pivoted away from the disastrous by-election results they got last night. The fact that
Trudeau's clapping back hard.
Canadians on putting forward a positive vision of this country that's resonating from.
I'm sorry. I'm going to interrupt the Prime Minister.
Ooh, this is gonna get dirty. This is gonna get dirty, everybody.
Now, I want to remind the honourable members that this morning there was a dust-up over name-calling and shouting, and after discussions or after hearing a point of order, I really expected everything to be calm, and it started off that way. So I'm going to ask both sides to not... I feel silly standing up here asking you not to call each other names or to yell at each other. But anyways, I'll let the Prime Minister continue. You have the Honourable Prime Minister has 20 seconds left.
Put forward a positive vision for Canadians for the future, investing in great jobs, investing in fighting climate change, supporting families through the challenging times they're in right now, while the Conservative Party continues to promote cuts, division, and anger. We're going to continue with a positive vision for the future.
Here comes the clapback by Pierre. Here comes the clapback. Oh.
Mr. Speaker, we are prepared to give the government the benefit of the doubt. Its plan to avoid at all costs a public and independent commission of inquiry into Chinese interference was not, let us say, a great success.
I want to see Pierre again.
His strategy of giving himself a very special rapporteur reporting strictly to the Prime Minister has, as they say, gone rather badly wrong. After that, we saw a sudden openness on the part of the Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs to a public inquiry. But the session is drawing to a close, Mr. Speaker, and frankly, we're beginning to think that the House and the media are being fooled. What are they waiting to trigger this commission? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, after the opposition turned this into a partisan affair with personal barbs against the former Governor-General, what we did, we offered collaborative work where everyone will be able to contribute that will not finish in acrimonious and partisan debate. And that is exactly why we are discussing with various parties for a positive step forward so that we can all take this issue very seriously, that we have taken seriously since the very beginning as a government. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc has held its head high since the beginning. This is a strategy as old as time. Fine words to appease the opposition until the end of the session, in the hopes that the media attention will be elsewhere in the fall. Especially since they could try to convince the good friends in the NDP to settle for a parliamentary committee during the summer instead of a real commission of inquiry. A classic, Mr. Speaker. Vintage. You need a commission of inquiry now, with a speaker appointed now, a chair voted on now by the House. No parliamentary messing around, no poorly carried out work. It's happening now. The ball is in their court. What are they waiting for? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, after the partisan games played by the other parties over the last few months, we are here to work with them in collaboration. And this in order to show that we can all take this very seriously. And that is why we are working with them now in order to establish the next steps to follow. We have always taken this very seriously from the very beginning, and we will continue to take it very seriously, irrespective of opposition partisan games. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Countless affordability studies warn of the repercussions when people have to spend more than 30% of their income on rent. But in Toronto, over 40% of people exceed that amount. Things are getting very, very difficult for Canadians. While corporate landlords are making massive profits, Canadians are struggling. When will this Prime Minister understand that we are on the verge of a catastrophe?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We know Canadians are struggling with the costs of housing, whether it's a young
I don't think they do know.
home or a student struggling to pay their rent. That's why we've been taking action on many fronts. We're helping Canadians save up for their first home. We're investing in building and repairing more homes, including through supporting local governments to fast-track the creation of 100,000 new homes. We're providing support for low-income renters. We're ensuring houses are used as homes by curbing unfair practices that drive up prices, including foreign home buyers ban and federal anti-flipping rule. We will continue to support Canadians challenged with housing.
But it's not working.
Burnaby South.
The Prime Minister and the Liberal government aren't responding with the urgency that Canadians need. Le 1er juillet.
The 1st of July is fast approaching, and in Quebec, July 1st is not only Canada Day, it's also Moving Day. 314 families in need have contacted the Municipal Housing Office in Montreal to report a loss of accommodation. The city expects to have to provide emergency accommodation for approximately 40 families. Will this Prime Minister finally realise the stress under which all of these families are? The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We have government programs for that.
Speaker, we continue to be there with programs and projects to help this housing crisis throughout the country. Our plan includes collaborating with municipalities by investing $4 billion to accelerate approvals for house building, creating 100,000 new housing units. We are bridging investments in infrastructure and housing. We're helping Canadians to save in order to buy their first house. We offer assistance to low-income renters. Surplus federal lands are being also reinvested.
Speaker, the Minister of Public Safety peddled fiction on his rifle hunting ban. He peddled fiction to a judge. He peddled fiction to the families of the victims of a murderer and a serial rapist. It's either gross incompetence or it's a deliberate attempt by his own staff to protect the minister with plausible deniability. Both seem to be a pattern in this government. They don't read emails, they don't get briefed, they don't know anything. So how many times can one minister peddle fiction in his or her portfolio until the Prime Minister fires somebody in this government? Or maybe the direction is coming from the top.
The Honourable
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what's reckless to public safety when you have a Conservative Party of Canada who proposes to make AR-15 style firearms illegal again. On this side of the House, we propose to ban them and buy them back to protect our communities. What's reckless, Mr. Speaker, is when you either introduce legislation that is unconstitutional or just filibuster it. That's what's reckless to public safety. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we put forward legislation that is there.
The jig is up, buddy.
We do it in a way that's constitutional. That's my focus. That's the focus of this government.
People are not dying from legal firearms.
I think at this point he'd stop peddling fiction. He knows that the minister can mandate that offenders like Bernardo can be kept in maximum security. Not the individual, but a class of the most horrific offenders. They know that they can stop it and do something about the transfer, like the last Conservative government did in 2013. The minister actually discussed options with his own staff, but he didn't do anything, and he knew for 3 months. And now he's saying they have a brand new system in place that will tell them what's happening in their own ministries. They owe the families an explanation, but at the very least, he owes this House a resignation.
Woo!
Honourable Minister.
Sorry for screaming.
It is preposterous to hear the Conservatives continue to stand up when their record is one of cuts. In their last year of government, Mr. Speaker, in 2014 and 15, they cut $300 million from the Correctional Service of Canada. We put that money back. We continue to invest in that institution so that we can protect Canadians, Mr. Speaker, and that is our focus.
Well, you're not doing a good job of it.
Conservatives can go on with cuts. They can go on with filibusterings. Canadians will see that through all of that. On this side of the House, we'll continue to focus on protecting Canadians.
Canadians see through the Liberals.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are wondering why this Prime Minister hasn't done more to safeguard our democratic systems. We know that he was briefed on foreign interference 6 times in the last 5 years. We know that members in this very House have been intimidated by Beijing. And we know that on 2 occasions, this House has directed the Prime Minister to have a public inquiry on foreign interference. So will he commit to having a public inquiry on foreign interference today?
Yep.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we have always taken the issue of foreign interference seriously. That is precisely why...
Could you say that any more dully?
...put in place measures to strengthen our democratic institutions. We're continuing to work with opposition parties because Canadians expect all people in this place to put partisanship aside and put the values of protecting our democracy at the forefront. Mr. Speaker,
Tell me you're a robot without telling me you're a robot.
foreign interference very seriously.
Very much. The Honourable
Mr. Speaker, it's evident they don't take it seriously. After 8 years, this Prime Minister has yet to call a public inquiry into foreign interference. In fact, he continues to stand in the way, enjoy the status quo because it benefits the Liberals. 7 months and all he did was appoint a special rapporteur, one who had to resign as a result of a conflict of interest. Right. 7 months, 2 votes in Parliament, and no public inquiry. Will he stand up today, support a public inquiry on foreign interference, yes or no?
Yep. That's how you talk in Parliament. Passion.
Really disappointing to see the Conservatives
She's like a robot.
The Minister of Intergovernmental
This is really disappointing.
with all parties in this place because we want to get to a place where Canadians can have trust in these institutions, where we can tone down the political rhetoric. Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed to see
Tone down the political rhetoric. You're a fucking politician.
rolling up the
Sorry for swearing, but
and getting to work to ensure that all Canadians have trust in their democratic institutions. That's precisely what we're focused on, and we're not going to be distracted by partisan games.
these guys are so stupid and oblivious.
Chasse les Justin Lévy. Mr. Speaker, for weeks we have been calling for a public inquiry into the Chinese Communist regime's interference in our country's affairs. The many stories that have been made public are worrying. For example, members of this House and their families have been the victims of a campaign of intimidation. That isn't nothing, Mr. Speaker. No one can explain why the government is turning a deaf ear to requests from this chamber to shed light on this interference. What is preventing the Prime Minister from launching a public inquiry?
The truth.
Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs is having very positive discussions with the opposition on the matter. We will find the best way to move forward, to engage with Canadians and consult them, to have a constructive dialogue, how we can build our work on foreign interference. We need to stop it with partisan games. We need to stop it with squabbling. That's what the Conservatives want. On this side, we will continue to work to protect our institutions. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. I don't think I'm squabbling with anyone. Oh, another worrying subject, Mr. Speaker. Paul Bernardo was allowed to leave his maximum security prison and go to a more lenient prison, this despite his horrific crimes. But we know that the Minister for Public Safety has the power to prevent this transfer. He can issue directives to that effect and has already done so in the past. Yet he refuses to do so. This adds to his long list of poor decisions. Does the Prime Minister still have confidence in his Minister for Public Safety? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, when I was told on the 30th of May that Mr. Bernardo was going to be transferred, I took concrete steps immediately by communicating with the Commission. Now there is an inquiry happening. I also published new instructives and directives to the department in order to make sure that victims are being informed before this kind of decision is made in the future, and will continue to make investments necessary to protect our communities. Thank you.
This guy's got to go, man.
Mr. Speaker, for Quebecers, July 1st is not a holiday, it's a nightmare. With a week and a half to go, hundreds of Quebecers don't know where they're going to live in the middle of a housing crisis. There is a shortfall of 50,000 social housing units in Quebec. Just imagine, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer concluded already in 2021 that if we rely on Ottawa's funding, there won't be any more. The federal strategy is a failure that is struggling to maintain the status quo. In other words, there'll be no more housing available tomorrow than there is today. Faced with a housing crisis, when will this government finally launch an actual effort for this crisis?
We need it.
Minister for Canadian Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois is saying that the 1st of July is a nightmare. Well, I take that as an insult to Canada. This is a country that is celebrated throughout the world, a country where we can live with dignity.
But you canceled Canada Day, dumbass.
A country that is in solidarity.
A few years ago.
We can be different, but be equal, and we can cohabitate together. I know that the Bloc Québécois wants to get rid of Canada, but Canada will always be there, today and tomorrow, even if they don't like it on the Bloc side. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
They're so delusional.
Mr. Speaker, I asked the Minister to walk around Longueuil on the 1st of July to see if it's a dream or a nightmare. Their investments are just enough to maintain the status quo. Just that. There is no more affordable housing than before. Tell that to the families of Greater Montreal who are competing with the federal government for the same increasingly expensive housing. Tell that to the people of Rimouski, Granby, Drummond, with a 0.4% vacancy rate. If you find a place there, you're lucky enough to buy a lottery ticket as well. Mr. Speaker, this housing crisis is unprecedented. When is the federal government going to invest to finally tackle this crisis? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. What I would have to say to him is that I went throughout Quebec recently, and I'm very much aware of vacancy rates, and that is exactly the reason for which we have created an accelerator fund for municipalities, and they are over the moon to have this fund. They will be able to immediately apply to this fund, and we will continue to be here to increase affordable housing in Canada.
It's not working.
Mr. Speaker, low supply in the rental market has disproportionately affected low-income tenants. It isn't the Bloc Québécois saying this. It's a quote from the CMHC in its annual report. the federal corporation itself has noted that the federal strategy is abandoning the least well-off. When it comes to housing, we need 1% more, not housing reserved for the 1%, 1% of federal revenues and income invested in housing, with Quebec's share transferred to build social and community housing. In the midst of a housing crisis, 1% isn't asking for too much, is it? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind the Honourable Member that housing is provincial. And we are very happy to be able to work hand in hand with provinces and municipalities.
You guys run the Bank of Canada.
Opposed to this party on the other side of the House that insults municipalities. We want to work hand in hand with all municipalities and all stakeholders in order to deliver the housing that everyone needs, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
L'Honorable, the Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From big cities to small towns, everyone is paying the price of Liberal inflationary deficits. After 8 years of that Prime Minister's spending, Canadians are feeling the pain. And the devastating reality is that those Liberal policies are the direct cause of Canadians' hardship, resulting in record food bank usage and housing becoming unaffordable for regular Canadians. And Liberals, propped up by the NDP, just poured another $60 billion of fuel on the inflationary fire. When will that Prime Minister end his inflationary spending so Canadians can keep their homes and afford the basics?
Yeah. The Honourable Tourism.
Clap for that.
Speaker, last night, voters in Winnipeg, in Montreal, and in historic numbers in Oxford showed up to vote against the reckless austerity, partisan populism, and ugly American-style attacks of the Conservative Party. You know, thousands of Canadians, Mr. Speaker, looked at the Twitter attacks, the video stunts, and the artful alliterations of the Conservative leader.
But the Conservatives won.
What it was, Mr. Speaker, they opted to support a real plan to support Canadians to invest in communities and build an economy that works for everyone.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
So, Mr. Speaker, I believe that that there were two Conservatives that were successful yesterday, and increasingly from across the country, hearing from Canadians that are hurting. Mortgages have doubled, rent has doubled, and Mr. Speaker, Canadians are visiting food banks in record numbers. And one has to ask, what is the cause of this pain? Well, Mr. Speaker, experts agree that the cause is this Liberal government's inflationary spending. Mr. Speaker, my question is simple to that minister. Will he rein in this deficit spending that is causing inflation?
Yeah. Hey, there's a new face.
What the member opposite said is completely false, and you are a fantastic referee, Mr. Speaker, but let's bring in an international referee on the health of Canada's economy in a report today from the International Monetary Fund that has said that Canada has, wait for it, Mr. Speaker,
AAA credit rating?
Fiscal position.
You think he's going to say it?
Best fiscal position in the G7. Mr. Speaker, don't take it from us, take it from the IMF. It means that we can invest in Canadians, grow the economy, stabilize healthcare, and not take any lessons from the Conservative Austerity Caucus.
Didn't say it.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to point out that we started off really well, and it seems to be deteriorating. So I just want to ask everyone to take a deep breath.
Shut up, Mr. Speaker.
It's almost like a rumble in the background. So, and I also want to point out, it's nice to see both sides talking to each other, but don't shout across the floor. Just go over and talk to each other, either one way or the other. The Honourable Member for Battleford's Westminster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years, Liberal-driven inflation is costing Canadians. The Prime Minister's massive deficit spending has caused record inflation and resulted in repeated interest rate hikes. Canada's housing market is now the most at risk of any developed country. And the latest rate hike is devastating for the nearly
4.75%
homeowners who are already struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister stop spending so that Canadians can keep a roof over their head?
Parliamentary.
In a perfect world.
You know, Mr. Speaker, what the member seems to be talking about are things that we are doing for Canadians, like the Canada Child Benefit, the Canada's Worker Benefit, the Climate Action Initiative, dental care, rental care, grocery rebates. Mr. Speaker, one thing we know is that this government since 2015 has had Canadians' backs. And when it comes to affordability, what speaks more than childcare? We're glad that the NDP, Conservatives, Bloc Québécois and Greens all voted together to make life more affordable for Canadian families through childcare and a publicly managed, primarily not-for-profit system that benefits our children, families, and Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Well, Mr. Speaker, even the Liberal Finance Minister has admitted that her government's deficit spending is fueling inflation, but they just...
She also said it was on purpose.
...inflationary fire. And after 8 years, Canadians cannot afford it. The more that these Liberals spend, the more costs go up and the more unaffordable it is for Canadians to feed and house their families. Canadians need the Liberals to finally show some restraint. When will the Prime Minister end his inflationary spending so that Canadians can finally feel some relief?
The Honourable Minister for Sport. Mr. Speaker, Canadians remember what the Conservative solution was before 2015. When times are tough and there's economic uncertainty, their solution is to cut. And when they cut, those who suffer are the most vulnerable and who are the most in need. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we will always be there to help those who need it, be it with dental care, be it with daycare fees, or all the other measures that we have instaured since we came to power in 2015. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, a new study from the Breakfast Club Canada shows that 84% of Canadians want a national school meal program implemented immediately. The Liberals promised to create...
Kids can't eat, man. This is crazy.
...years ago, but they still haven't delivered. Meanwhile, schools are cutting services like Feed Kids because they can't afford to pay for the program because of the rising cost of food. When will the Liberals keep their promise and implement a national school meal program?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we know that times are tough for Canadian families right now, and we know that we need to ensure that our most vulnerable, our children, are protected. That's why, Mr. Speaker, since 2015, we've been working to reduce child poverty and support the families who need it the most.
Kids will have nice, clean teeth, but won't be able to eat.
Other measures, including affordability and childcare, and we will continue to work, Mr. Speaker. We know that the school food programs are important, and that's why we continue to work together across the aisle to ensure that we meet the needs of Canadian children. Thank you.
Well done. The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Griesbach.
Edmonton now has one of the fastest growing monthly rent prices in the country, increasing nearly 16% over the last year. Young people can't keep up and Liberals aren't doing anything. They won't protect young people from corporate landlords who are handing out eviction notices to jack up the rent. They are not invest properly into building affordable units, and they're leaving young people to fend for themselves while corporate landlords keep getting richer. Mr. Speaker, will the Liberals invest in safe, affordable, community-based housing so young people can actually afford to rent in Edmonton?
I don't know. End the coalition and we'll find out.
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. I thank my colleague for his question. Indeed, across the country, Canadians are struggling to pay rent or even to find housing for themselves that they can afford. We have committed to building more housing units faster, but also we're going to crack down on rent evictions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Madawaska-Restigouche. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The modernization of the Official Languages Act has just passed third reading in the Senate. In my opinion, this is a major step towards the substantive equality of our two official languages. Could the minister tell us what advancements this legislation will allow in order to better support official language minority communities, promoting our two official languages, and protecting French from coast to coast to coast? The Honourable Official Languages Minister. Mr. Speaker, good news. The Senate just confirmed royal assent for Bill C-13. I'm very proud of the work we have accomplished to modernize the Official Languages Act. With this act, we will have better tools to halt the decline of French and to better protect our official language minority communities. Among other things, this law will require the adoption of a Francophone immigration policy. It will strengthen the powers of the Commissioner of Official Languages, and it will give new tools to OLMCs to ensure their vitality. Mr. Speaker, it's a great day for official languages.
Member for Foothills.
After 8 years of this government, Canadian farmers are literally paying for the Liberals' carbon tax failures. Canadian farmers will pay $150,000 a year in carbon taxes alone, but the Liberals haven't hit a single emissions target. So what's better than making farmers pay for one failed carbon tax? How about two? On July 1st, the Liberals are introducing a second carbon tax. Will increase the price of feed, fuel, and fertilizer, which will also drive up the cost of food at the grocery store. With more than 8 million Canadians already relying on a food bank every single month, my question to the government is how many farmers are going to go bankrupt, how many Canadians will go hungry, paying for another failed carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister for Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, my colleague is twisting the facts. He's talking about a typical farm of 5,000 acres, but the average farm in Canada is 809 acres, and he is assuming that agriculture producers will do nothing to reduce emissions, but they're working very hard on that. They're among the first to try to adopt good practices, new technology, get the information, and we're helping them with $1.5 billion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The minister isn't denying that Canadian farmers are being punished with 2 carbon taxes. And in fact, they're facing the highest inflation rates in 40 years. And nowhere is that more acute with the price of food, which is already up 10%. But rather than offering support for Canadians, the Liberals are doubling down with a second carbon tax. What that will do is we are seeing forecasts that food prices will go up another 34% over the next 2 years, adding another $5,000 to Canadians' annual food costs. Again, to the government, when they introduce a second carbon tax, how many farmers will go broke and how many Canadians will go hungry?
The Honourable Parliamentary.
We're all going hungry, man.
If the member from across would really like to talk about the clean fuel regulations, let's talk about that. It's kind of interesting because Alberta itself has clean fuel regulations. And what does it do? It actually incents like cleaner fuels, but it also works to support emerging industries like biofuels, which I think are quite popular in his part of the country as well. What we are doing, it's not just a regulation, there are incentives and there are supports to make sure that we have an all-encompassing program. It's not only going to reduce emissions, but it's also going to create new industries and new renewable fuels that are so important for our future.
The Honourable Member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Speaker, it's official Liberal policy to make energy more expensive. It takes energy to manufacture fertilizer. It takes energy to ship fertilizer to the farmers. It takes energy to spread fertilizer. It takes energy to harvest crops. It takes energy to ship crops to processors. It takes energy to process crops into food. It takes energy to ship.
Oh, you're talking too much common sense, lady.
Minister, understand that higher energy prices lead to higher food prices and forcing Canadians to go hungry.
Woo!
The Honourable Agriculture Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the Clean Technology Program, that's $500 million.
That was good. Everybody should drop a W in the chat for that.
Technology.
Conservative
One
woman.
of the newest innovations that can be deployed across country is using manure as energy, and there's a lot of potential for that. We will continue to support agriculture in these ways. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the government has no plan to make food more affordable. The multiple carbon taxes and the tariff on fertilizers have only increased the price of food from farm to table. The cost of production in Canada continues to rise, and farmers have been utterly abandoned by this government. As we saw in the last budget, less than 1% of the budget was allocated to agriculture. The Liberals are overlooking a major economic driver.
This guy always makes me crave fried chicken.
Farmers
and I don't eat fried chicken.
More affordable.
Can't afford it.
The Honourable Agriculture Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think my colleague should perhaps look at the history of what the last Conservative government did. They cut hundreds of millions in risk management programs. They cut hundreds of millions in research and innovation. Mr. Speaker, our government has invested. We increased by $500 million the Sustainable Agriculture Partnership. We have invested in clean tech, clean practices, and research and innovation to help agriculture be more resilient. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Jean-Pierre. Mr. Speaker, forest fires are having a major impact on Quebec's forestry industry. It's too early to assess and evaluate the losses, but it's already too late to guarantee our producers a rapid return to the activities that would protect jobs. The Bloc Québécois has proposed solutions.
Arson's one hell of a thing for climate change.
Québécoise des entrepreneurs forestiers. We need to compensate for loss of equipment, including and especially the cost of insurance deductibles. We need to take inspiration from pandemic programs to cover fixed costs and to offer a wage subsidy to keep workers in their jobs. Will the government work with us to implement these solutions?
They want to tax to put the fires out.
Important question, and we know that the wildfires that have been impacting right across the country are having an impact on residents, but also businesses in every part of the country. Through working with our provincial partners, the Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement will be there to support those businesses and communities for eligible expenses, and we also know that we have to invest in future resiliency in our provinces as well.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, obviously, if forestry producers are worried, then their employees are worried too. Seasonal workers in forestry-related sectors are all at a standstill with no prospect of returning to work. And they're worried because all those hours lost today are hours that employment insurance will blame them for not having accumulated by the end of the season. The government is showing openness and flexibility for the time being, and we applaud that. But will the government extend the reference period to 104 weeks to prevent the hours missed due to the fires from placing our workers in precarious employment situation in the fall? Mr. Speaker, as my colleague...
Oh, here we go.
We're here for all provinces, including Quebec.
She's like Bubbles
we're
from
working
Trailer
with
Park Boys.
Associations and with employers to ensure that workers have the support that they need during this very difficult time. We're working with Service Canada in order to ensure that workers have access to EI, and we will continue that.
Cypress Hills grasslands.
Mr. Speaker, as we start summer, the Liberals are going to rain on everyone's Canada Day parade. You see, on July 1st, Canadians will be forced to pay a second carbon tax. Combined with the first carbon tax, gas prices will go up eventually to 61 cents per litre higher. But it doesn't stop there. They're going to raise both carbon taxes so that every Saskatchewan household has to pay another $3,000 per year. Wow. After 8 years of this Liberal government, Canadians cannot afford another tax increase by this government. No. Will the Liberals listen to Canadians and cancel both of their failed carbon taxes before July 1st?
Here, here.
I mean, that would be nice.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, again, if the member opposite wants to talk about clean fuel regulations, let's do that. I thought the party opposite was really interested in technological solutions to climate change. Well, let's talk about how clean fuel regulations help to drive clean technologies. That means better biofuels, developing through hydrogen, all of which supports our economy of the future. It's very important that we take it's not just one thing in isolation. It's the fact that we have a fuels fund that helps to support people. We'd have an all-encompassing framework that covers all sectors of our economy so that we can plan for a strong economy in the future.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland Colchester.
The Nova Scotia forestry industry employs thousands. This is a traditional way of life and a major employer for rural communities. Atlantic Canadians have been affected by this carbon tax by more than any other region in the country, and now they are implementing a second carbon tax. Farmers and fishers are exempt from the carbon tax, but not foresters, and they demand equal treatment, Mr. Speaker. Atlantic Canadian premiers have spoken out against the 61 cent a litre carbon tax. Why is the Liberal government on punishing Atlantic Canadians and the foresters with a $33 billion industry, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable.
That's insane.
Resources.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. It is certainly important that parties around this House actually have a plan to address climate change, but we must do so in a manner that is affordable. The price on pollution is in a manner where 8 out of 10 Canadian families
afford
get more money back than they actually pay. It is an effective manner for addressing climate change. And I would tell you that one of the political parties in this House, in the platform that they ran on in 2021, says, and I quote, "We recognize that the most efficient way to reduce our emissions is to use pricing mechanisms." That was the Conservative Party of Canada.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government hasn't been in power for 8 years. It has been making people believe that it's working to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Their solution is now to add a second carbon tax. But they say, oh, it won't affect Quebec. Mr. Speaker, that is not the truth. This second Liberal carbon tax will cost Quebecers over $430 more. This government must stop taxing and must start taking effective action for the environment to get real results. Will it cancel this second carbon tax, which is scheduled to take effect on July 1st? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, first, I'd like to say that when we take stock of our GHG emissions, they are decreasing. Our action is having an effect and will continue to lower our emissions. But that's not all. When it comes to clean fuels will also help the economy. So we are doing two things at the same time. There's regulation, but there's also additional support to use clean fuels, and that's very important for our economy as we transition toward a green future.
City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last 2 years have put our transportation sector through a lot, from the COVID-19 to extreme weather to the Russian war on Ukraine.
You guys caused all of it.
To another busy summer travel season. Could the Minister of Transport provide us an update on what our government is doing to support Canadians build and build a strong federal transportation sector? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is correct. The aviation sector around the world has experienced significant disruptions over the last couple of years, and Canadian workers and travellers felt it here at home. We promised Canadians to take actions on lessons learned. So far, we've strengthened passenger protection rights. We are working to modernize CATSA, and today I had the honour of tabling Bill C-52 that will enhance service standards for airports and airlines and enhance transparency. This is great news for Canadians, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on advancing this important legislation.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lisley, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, the carbon tax is having an impact across the country, the whole country, even in Quebec, despite what the Minister and the Prime Minister claim. As if that weren't bad enough, the government is going to impose an additional tax, a second tax on carbon, starting July 1st. Quebec families will pay an average of $436 a year for this new measure, which they do not at all need. We know that families are already struggling to make ends meet, so will this Prime Minister show some common sense and drop this new tax? The Honourable Minister of Sport. Mr. Speaker, I'm so disappointed to hear Conservative colleagues from Quebec talk about cancelling carbon pricing, carbon tax, because climate change has a cost. There are costs in Quebec and everywhere in Canada, especially those who are currently affected by wildfires. So Conservatives in 2021 campaigned, in fact, on pricing pollution. So they are going back on their word and on their promises. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to fight climate change. I would like to remind the members that when they are reading from a paper, they should not hit the papers.
Member for Coast of Bay Central, Notre Dame.
Mr. Speaker, these Liberals have had 8 years of blaming everyone and everything for their failures. They failed yet again. This time they failed to release quotas for Northern Cod, East Coast capelin, mackerel, and southwestern Nova Scotia herring on time. Harvesters and processors cannot count on this minister to deliver decisions that their livelihoods depend on. So will this Liberal government stop failing the fishing industry and announce these quotas immediately?
The Honourable Minister for Fisheries and Oceans.
And my goal is to grow Canada's fish and seafood sector and do it in a sustainable way so it is there for the long term and for the next generations. Mr. Speaker, the stocks mentioned, their decisions have not yet been made, and when they are made, I will announce them for the member and for all of the fish harvesters on Eastern Canada.
The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Mr. Speaker, my question is directed to the chair of the Public Safety Committee. Just before question period, members of the committee were informed that the meeting had been cancelled for this afternoon. We were told that all parties had consented to this meeting. None of the opposition parties have consented to this meeting. I can only think that the reason this meeting has been cancelled on such short notice is to protect the Minister of Public Safety from a Conservative motion calling on him to appear to answer questions about the Bernardo transfer. Can the chair of the Public Safety Committee tell this House why they're going this far to protect the Minister of Public Safety? Why did they cancel this meeting?
Wow. There it is. There it is. You're not going to calm the Conservatives down. They are hyped up. Look at the Liberals. Look at the left side of the House.
Mr. Speaker, what we've seen...
Order. 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 Can I have the person who's going to answer the question please stand up? The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what we've seen, unfortunately, for the last 3 weeks is a party that is bent on obstructing everything at every turn. Whether or not it's pretending to have technical problems they don't have, or raising phony points.
Oh, the speaker's going to interrupt.
And yelling when others are trying to talk and have the floor. They know very well that the decision in question was made independently by corrections, and what they are covering up is the ability for this House to do its work on behalf of Canadians. Well, Mr. Speaker, we will not be deterred. We will continue the business of this nation. We will adopt the legislation that is needed, and we will be there for Canadians.
The honourable member from Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, a free and independent press is vital to our democracy. But last week, we found out that 1,300 families have been affected by Bell's layoffs. While online platforms and web giants benefit from access to the Canadian market, they have no responsibility toward our local Canadian artists, creators, and media. This is another example of why we need Bills C-11 and C-18 to ensure that web giants pay their fair share to our local media. Can the Minister of Canadian Heritage tell the House how our government is committed to defending our democracy by supporting the Honourable Canadian Heritage Minister? Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Châteauguay-Lacolle for her question and for her absolutely incredible work. C-18 is crucial to save our newsrooms. It's crucial for ensuring that web giants pay their fair share. But every step of the way, Conservative politicians have filibustered to block the passage of C-11 and C-18 because they would prefer to defend web giants than to defend Canadians, jobs, and a free press. But on this side of the House, we will continue to stand up for democracy. We've always done it, we're doing it today, and we will continue to do it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, rising food prices are putting pressure on families. The Edmonton Food Bank has had to cut the amount of food in their hampers by 25% to meet demand. And 40,000 Albertan kids who get lunch at school will go without once the school rises for the summer. Grocery CEOs are making millions in surplus profits, and this government is doing nothing to help Canadians. Now, while the Prime Minister and the Leader of the official opposition have private chefs and fridges full of food, Canadian children are going hungry. When will the Prime Minister finally start tackling corporate greed and implement a windfall tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we understand that food security has been on the rise and continue to make investments to support those facing hardships. We've made significant investments for Canadian families through targeted social programs and income supplements like the CCB so that families don't need to make difficult choices when it comes to food and other essential needs. We've made funding available to food banks and charities, and we'll continue to address the work of food insecurity, including delivering on our National School Food Policy Program. The Prime Minister highlighted this priority in his mandate letters to both the Minister of FCSD, Agriculture and Agri-Food. We will continue to work for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, the other day I got an email from the owner of Grizzly Gyms, a general store in Topley, BC. Like hundreds of thousands of other small business owners across this country, he accessed the Canada Business or Emergency Business account to keep his doors open during some of the most difficult times this country has seen. But revenues still haven't fully recovered, and now small businesses are facing the added pressures of inflation and a tight labor market. There's a simple way that the minister can help businesses like Grizzly Gyms, and that's to extend the repayment period for the CEBA business loans by an additional year. Will the minister do this?
Here, here. The Honourable Minister for Small Business.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my honourable colleague for that really important question and for his advocacy and all of ours in this House for small businesses across the country. What has been really heartening is to see the almost 1 million small businesses get through the pandemic with the CEBA loan. We have, of course, been in touch with many of the businesses, some of whom we know are still having a tough time. But throughout this period, I want to thank the Canadian small businesses for their resiliency, and we'll continue to keep working on this very issue. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have.
This is all the time we have for question period.
Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between is where we're going to end this session of Whose Fault Is It? Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the super chats. Sorry if I missed some. I try not to interrupt too much other than my screaming and just crazy reactions like of what happens. I try not to interrupt too much of the stream. So if you super chat, I probably won't announce it or talk about it verbally until the end of the stream. And that's just not to interrupt the mood and the flow. So I with the $11 super chat. Thank you very much. And there was another one earlier. I can't see the name of it, but I do appreciate them, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow, same time. Thank you, Maude, Misa, YYC for being here. We'll see everybody tomorrow, same time. We are running out of a landing strip here for a question period. We're almost done. It's almost summer break. So you're going to want to tune in for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And yeah, it's going to be crazy, everybody. Drop a like on the video if you haven't yet. We're just shy of 500. So if you guys can do that, check to see if you're subscribed as well. Much appreciated. Toodaloo, everybody. That was weird. Who says that? I did, apparently. Bye for now.